Why is it that we read novels, or indeed write them? I suspect that one reason we read novels is that we're all of us aware, either guiltily or joyfully or gratefully, that we discover who we are and what we are, partly by telling and retelling stories about ourselves. Most of us know what it's like to reinvent ourselves as we tell our story. And so when we read a novel, one of the things that's going on is that we're watching a person, a self, in the process of being constructed as a story unfolds.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 15th of July 2016 and it's about 7:30. And obviously I'm making you my usual Friday evening video to reassure you I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax, because obviously I'm saving myself for my beloved, who I'm going to be with the moment that you're in jail. But I'll say some more about that later on. Anyway, I'm going to talk this evening about a talk that you gave on the 15th of May 2016, where you were talking about novels, and in particular you illustrated your points by referring to Russian novels and novelists, and you also mentioned Shakespeare. And the 15th of May, that's the same day, you preached a sermon at the beginning of Christian Aid Week at St Albans Abbey, where you told me I had to knock on doors and swallow hard and ask for money. And the day after that, you gave a talk about Dostoevsky at the Royal Society of Literature, and I have made a video about this before, a couple of videos in fact, where you were saying that the universe isn't finished, and I shouldn't move on too quickly. I am going to comment on that a bit further on in this video. And this was the occasion when you were also talking about some fictitious inquisitor in the Spanish Inquisition in 16th century Spain. You were paraphrasing this story and quite obviously misrepresenting it, which I've already commented on. And you kind of outed yourself as a Satanist there, which I already knew you were anyway, but you outed yourself because you referred to the three temptations of Christ. Christ was taken into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan, and he was tempted with three temptations, and you only mentioned two of them. You didn't mention the third temptation, where Satan offered him all the kingdoms of the earth if he would bow down and worship him, and Jesus refused and said that you should only worship God. Of course, you didn't refuse. In fact, you have bowed down and worshipped Satan, and the doctrine that you preach is satanic, and you're colluding and providing propaganda and perception management for the New World Order, which is a Luciferian conspiracy to take over the whole world, and I've made many videos already to explain that. So this video then is of a talk that you did the day before this talk about Dostoevsky at the Royal Society of Literature, and the same day you preached a sermon at the beginning of Christian Aid Week at St Albans Abbey. But this video has only been uploaded in the last couple of weeks, which is why I couldn't comment on it before. So I'm going to talk about this video in several sections. So first of all, we've just had a clip now, and you make a statement in that clip saying most of us know what it's like to reinvent ourselves. Well, I can't say that I do really. I think you might want to keep reinventing yourself because you haven't really got any personality, have you? You're just a series of masks that you put on to try and manipulate other people into giving you what you want. And really, it's a bit late to be reinventing yourself at the age of 66. You need to face who you are, as I've said many times before, and stop trying to manipulate other people, particularly me, into giving you what you want, because it's simply not going to happen. Because I have a personality, you see, a formed personality. I made decisions about my life when I was still a young person, and I'm not deviating from them for any reason. So you're wasting your time, because I've got a formed personality. This is what you don't understand. But I'm going to say some more about that a bit later on. And You talk also in this clip I've just shown about, in a novel, watching a person, a self, in the process of being constructed as the story unfolds. So I just want to make the point that you're not actually watching a person in a novel, are you? Because it's fiction. It's not real. It's make-believe. So you're not watching a person. You're watching something that the novelist has created. And it's not a real person, it's make-believe. Maybe the novelist based certain attributes of the person on someone they've encountered or read about in history or something like that. But the person in the novel isn't a real person, it's make-believe. This is what you don't understand, you see. The people in the world are real people, and the people in novels are make-believe. So that's all I'm going to say on the first part, but I'm going to comment on a clip I'm going to show in a minute now. So in this clip that I'm going to show you, say, we want to know how stories get told because we like doing it ourselves. Well, you like telling stories, don't you? And you go around spreading your stories, spreading scandal about other people like me, and you spread it as if it were facts. And I said a long time ago that you were having sexual fantasies about me, and you were spreading these fantasies around as if they were facts. And a long time ago, when I was commenting on the lecture you gave about Teresa of Avila at Dedham Parish Church in September last year, I said you also did the same thing to her as well, because you did describe her as something like irrepressibly flirtatious, which she wasn't. Oh, there's no evidence that she was anyway, that she had a lot of critics, and someone would have criticised her for that if it had been true. And you also said that she had a love affair as a teenager, and that wasn't true either. You've just made that up. And in fact, you contradict something that's said in a book about her that's got your name on it, where you said she couldn't possibly have had a love affair. So you invented those things and you presented them to your audience as if they were facts. And that's what you've done to me as well. And the fact that I think you're having sexual fantasies about me and spreading them around as facts is based on the research I've done into things that you've said. It's not just an opinion that I've made up out of nothing. I don't make things up out of nothing. I base things on what I observe, what I read and research and so on. So we want to know how stories get told because we like doing it ourselves. We want to know because we want to understand a bit better what it's like to turn into a person, to become a self. Well, at your age, Rowan, 66 years old, you shouldn't be thinking like that, really. You should already be a person. And the fact is that you won't face yourself, you won't face the evil things that you've done, and you're very confused that these ciphers around you don't act in the way that you want them to. I will say a bit more about that in a minute. So I'm not fascinated. If I read a novel, it's kind of escapism for me. I know I'm kind of escaping into something that isn't real, and it might be interesting and entertaining and so on, but I'm not really fascinated by the characters to this extent and wondering what it's like to become a person. You see, because I am a person, a formed person, and I already know. And the majority of people are like that, the majority of adults anyway. The personality is generally formed by the age of 25, as I've said before. And the fact that you're still talking like this at the age of 66 just illustrates how disturbed you are, really. We know that the storyteller knows more than the character in the story can ever know. Well, the character in the story can't ever know anything because the character in the story doesn't exist. The character in the story is make-believe, not a real person. The storyteller may say, as some great novelists have said of their characters, that they are surprised by what the characters do. Tolstoy famously said he was astonished when Anna Karenina decided to commit suicide. But we know actually they are in control. And if Tolstoy had decided that Anna Karenina should live happily ever after, he could have done it. And Anna Karenina wouldn't be in any position to object. So I think that this further illustrates the fact that you only see other people as ciphers around you, that you need to manipulate into behaving the way that you want, into saying the things that you want. In actual fact, you're the novelist in real life, aren't you? The whole of the world, like I've said before, it's a fantasy in your head. And the people you see around you, they're characters in your novel, aren't you? And you're the novelist, and you decide how their story is going to end and how they're going to behave. And it's your job to make everybody behave in the way that you want, so your novel has the ending that you want. Obviously, with you coming out as a hero, on top of everybody and in charge of the whole world and all that kind of thing, because of your narcissistic delusions. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip now and then I'll say some more in a minute.
So one reason for reading novels is sheer curiosity. We want to know how stories get told, because we like doing it ourselves. We want to know, because we want to understand a bit better, what it's like to turn into a person, to become a self. But of course, a novel isn't just somebody else telling a story, let alone telling a story about themselves. We know that the storyteller knows more than the character in the story can ever know. We know that there's irony shot through every novel. The storyteller may say, as some great novelists have said of their characters, that they're surprised by what the characters do. Tolstoy famously said he was astonished when Anna Karenina decided to commit suicide. But we know, actually, they are in control. And if at the end of that enormous book Tolstoy had decided that Anna Karenina should live happily ever after, he could have done it, and Anna Karenina wouldn't be in any position to object.
So you then go on to say, so also when we read a novel, we're looking at insecurity, at complicated layers of meaning and possibility. We're looking not just at a story of how life unfolds and how a person gets made, we're also looking at the very different kinds of meaning, the very different kinds of trajectory that could emerge. So you seem to regard these people in novels as being as real as people who are in the real world, real actual human beings I'm talking about. And you talk about how a life unfolds and how a person gets made. Well, I've talked about this before, haven't I? About the fact that you think your speech has creative power and that you only have to say that something's true and it automatically becomes true. You think that you have creative power. And I've mentioned this before in relation to me. Because in this talk that you gave about Dostoevsky at the Royal Society of Literature, the day after the talk that I'm talking about now, this was when you said that one of the characters in Dostoevsky's novels was driven into prostitution because of the poverty of her family. And I've mentioned this before, that if you really think that you can shape people's behaviour and identity and their values and everything by changing the circumstances of their life, then all you had to do in my life was improve the circumstances of my life, make things easy for me, and that would have improved my character then, wouldn't it, according to your definition? But in fact, you did the opposite. And as I've said before, the reason for that is not that you thought I was a repressed lesbian and a prostitute and a priest seducer and all these kind of things. It wasn't because you thought I was that. It was because that was the kind of person you were trying to create me into. And so we've got this illustration of this kind of thinking here, where you say we're looking not just at a story of how a life unfolds and how a person gets made. Well, people don't get made. They're already made. Even newborn children have inherent character. Obviously, their environment shapes that, and the way that they're brought up and so on, the experiences that they have. But any mother who has more than one child can tell you that the children are different from birth. So persons are not going to get made, and particularly not adults whose personality is already formed. And the fact that you have this attitude just illustrates how confused and disturbed you are about the nature of reality and about the nature of other people. This is just adolescent ramblings at the best. We're also looking at the very different kinds of meaning, the very different kinds of trajectory that could emerge. Well, don't look at my life imagining the different kinds of trajectory that could emerge, because I'm not changing one iota in response to your manipulations and your abuse and the situation in my life that you've had created to try and create me into the person that you want me to be, which is also now to save your own skin. But it wasn't like that right at the beginning. You had other motives. So no different trajectory is going to emerge in my life. I've already made all the significant decisions of my life. I don't need to make any other decisions. I'm not changing my mind about anything. And you're not going to force me to be someone other than who I am, because you've got a completely disturbed worldview. You don't understand the nature of people at all. And you're a psychopath, you're gaslighting, and I'm not going to change, I'm not going to give you what you want. So don't imagine there's going to be any different trajectory from what I've said already. These are my decisions, I've made them, and I'm not changing them, and particularly not for a psychopathic scumbag, satanic filth like you. Just so that you can lord it over me and save your own skin. I don't think so. You've got to be kidding. We get a sense of the fragility and the oddity of human identity. Well, it's not that fragile, to be honest, really. I mean, human existence might be fragile in that it's vulnerable to all kinds of attacks, and of course, everybody's mortal. But human identity isn't that fragile, really, not in an adult. All of which adds up to a good set of reasons for reading novels. If we're interested in people, yourself, the world, or even, in my line of business, God. Well, you're not necessarily learning anything about people in novels, are you? Because, as I've said, they're fiction. You're learning a lot more about people listening to me, Rowan, because I'm telling you how it is, and that I'm setting the boundaries, I'm controlling the narrative, and I'm not giving you what you want. I'm standing up to you, which is what your mother should have done over 60 years ago. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip, and then I'm going to make another comment.
So, also when we read a novel, we're looking at insecurity, at complicated layers of meaning and possibility. We're looking not just at a story of how a life unfolds and how a person gets made, we're also looking at the very different kinds of meaning, the very different kinds of trajectory that could emerge. We get a sense of the fragility and the oddity of human identity. All of which adds up to quite a good set of reasons for reading novels if we're interested in people, yourself, the world, or even, in my line of business, God.
So, you're talking now about a Russian novel. You do give the details of it, and I'll play it in the clip. And you're talking about a man reinventing himself. And you say he reinvents himself to give space, to give room to that lost other person. When he reinvents himself, he's not trying to make himself more secure, more interesting, more sexy, more powerful. He's trying to reinvent himself in order to open up space for another. So you're on the space again, aren't you? You can reinvent yourself all you want, but underlying it all, underlying it all is the fact that you're just trying to manipulate me to give you what you want and to save your skin. And also, I'm not going to be reinventing myself, so don't hold your breath.
So I want to talk a bit about one particular recent novel by a Russian novelist, Eugene Vodolazkin. And here's his novel called Laurus, which is about 15th century Russia. I've chosen to talk about this partly because I think it's a brilliant novel, partly because it unfolds some of the issues I've flagged up at the beginning as general questions. It's a story about a man growing up in central Russia in the 15th century. An orphan brought up by his grandfather, trained by his grandfather in traditional healing methods, among other things. Grandfather dies, the young man himself becomes a healer. He forms a relationship with a young woman who turns up in the village one day. The young woman dies in childbirth, so does the child. And the young man is consumed with guilt and terror and self-reproach about what he might have done and couldn't have done. He has to come to terms with his own powerlessness and his own ignorance, an ignorance which has actually caused the death of 2 other people. So, in a way, he's faced with a question of how he can go on being the same self, and that self is apparently guilty of the death of others. What happens next is a very different kind of reinvention from the one we often think of in terms of our own experience or of novels. The young man, Arseny, does indeed reinvent himself. He decides that the rest of his life has in some way got to be a life that represents in the world the person he has loved and lost. He's got to live a life on behalf of Ustina, his dead lover, and her child. You could say he reinvents himself to give space, to give room to that lost other person. When he reinvents himself, he's not trying to make himself more secure, more interesting, more sexy, more powerful. He's trying to reinvent himself in order to open up space for an other.
So you then say, you're quoting from the book now, from a book. You say, "Disown your identity," says the other holy fool to Arseny. "Disown yourself completely." As the novel unfolds, you can see how this giving space to the other, this reinventing of a self that's not defensive, aggressive and anxious, is actually a flowering, a maturing at the same time. So you quote from this book about Arseny again, and you say, "In his explanation of pain, he gets to the very bottom of things." Right, well, I'm not reinventing myself to be defensive, aggressive and anxious. But you talk about these things as if they're bad things. They're not in fact bad things, being defensive. Being aggressive also when you're under attack, which I'm continually under attack every day. And I've been under attack from you for decades, which I didn't even know about. And in fact, I should have been more defensive and more aggressive. And had I known about these things, perhaps I would have been. And also being anxious that someone is going to treat you in the evil way that they've treated you countless times in the past. There's nothing wrong with that either. So I do not define myself as defensive, aggressive and anxious, but I do behave in these ways and adopt this attitude when people are attacking me and forcing themselves on me. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. So you go on to say that if you reinvent yourself in a way that's not defensive, aggressive and anxious, this is actually a flowering and maturing at the same time. Well, this was another cultic teaching I experienced in the Church of England. They talk about spiritual maturity, and they regarded people who had firm beliefs as being immature and they thought that teenagers had firm beliefs. In fact, I remember one parish church I was involved in, there was a teenage girl there. She was very enthusiastic and dedicated, but she got a bit bored with the church, which is hardly surprising because it was a phenomenally boring place and full of old people who knew everything. In a lot of cases. And of course, the vicar was promoting all the dysfunctional personalities as a means of including everyone, because that's what Jesus said, isn't it? Include everyone, no matter how dysfunctional they are and how much they stress out the other members of the parish and talk crap and just want to hug the limelight all the time. That's what Jesus said, isn't it? So, no, he didn't say anything like that, did he? So anyway, I don't know if this girl was bothered about all of those things, but anyway, she found another church that she wanted to go to, an evangelical church, and she went and joined that. And some other young people went and joined the Baptist church. And now I've got to join the Catholic Church. But you see, the point is, people in the Church of England talk about maturity and spiritual maturity. And what they're actually talking about is adolescent angst. It's a bunch of grown-ups who should know better, sitting around discussing the ins and outs of every fine detail of Christian doctrine and deciding they don't believe most of it really, except the bits that make them feel good in that particular moment. So I'll pass up on maturity in that case. And I have said before, I was called immature in the Church of England for calling certain beliefs unchristian and challenging people who should have been teaching Christian faith, but were in fact just gaslighting me and using mind control techniques, all being puppeteered by you, of course. So this is considered immature in the Church of England, being able to think for yourself and not going along with the prevailing pseudo-doctrine, which is in fact a cult and is made up for the benefit of the people who have the most power, which are the clergy. So, this quote from the book about this character Arsene, in his explanation of pain, he gets to the very bottom of things. His exploration of pain, he gets to the very bottom of things. Well, you're not exploring pain in me, are you, Rowan? You haven't been exploring pain in me. You've been creating it on purpose to try and create me into the person you wanted me to be. And the more that didn't happen, the more panic-stricken you got. And you completely flipped when I didn't capitulate after you had me thrown out of St Michael's Church. And that's when you went round telling everybody all over the world that it was me making sexual advances to that creepy old pervert David Pete. So you're not getting to the bottom of things. You're trying to cause as much pain and suffering as you possibly can to bring people under your control. So then you say, that healing life, that life which is grounded in giving room for the other who's been lost, for the other who's been frustrated, who's been crushed by suffering, in that giving room, Arsene becomes not only more fully himself, but a place where very many others can find life and hope. Well, this is quite funny, isn't it? So I'm not lost, as it happens, I know where I am and where I'm going and so on. So I'm not lost. It's actually you who's lost. You're a lost soul, aren't you? You're a ruined soul. You're of the lost, so you're lost. But you've done everything you can to frustrate me and crush me with suffering. And here you are presenting yourself as the saviour again, aren't you? You're going to help me with all of these problems that I wouldn't even have if it wasn't for you. You really do think I was born yesterday. I never heard anyone talk as much shit as you. I really didn't. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip and comment again in a minute.
Disown your identity, says the other holy fool to Arsene. Disown yourself completely. Put in those terms, it's a very frightening command. But as the novel unfolds, you can see how this giving space to the other, this reinventing of a self that's not defensive, aggressive, and anxious, is actually a flowering, a maturing at the same time. We have descriptions of Arseny as a healer. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Doctoring experience tells him medicaments are not the most important part of treatment. Arseny does not help everyone. He hears out the patient, but turns away from him when he feels powerless to help. Sometimes he will press his forehead to the patient's forehead, and tears will flow from his eyes. He shares the patient's pain with him, and to some degree his death too. Arseny's heart fills with grief, because he understands that the world does not remain the same after a patient passes away. But even the patients Arseny cannot cure feel benefit from interacting with him. They think their pain reduces after meeting with Arseny, and their fear lessens along with the pain. In his exploration of pain, he gets to the very bottom of things. That healing life, that life which is grounded in a giving room to the other who's been lost, the other who's been frustrated, who's been crushed by suffering, in that giving room, Arseny becomes not only more fully himself, but a place where very many others can find life and hope.
Right, so this Arseny character becomes a monk, and you say he goes on, you might say, reinventing himself, but he goes on reinventing himself in a way that consistently gives more and more space. That's a coincidence, isn't it? So then you say, Russian novels of the 19th and 20th century often have figures in them who are, in the eyes of the world, failures, or who are, in the eyes of the world, impossibly eccentric. These figures turn out to be the ones who actually bring something new or different into a world where people are constantly trying to reinvent themselves so as to be safer with fewer open doors around them. Well, I'm not reinventing myself, and the majority of people are not reinventing themselves. You think you're reinventing yourself, but you're not doing that. In fact, you're just swapping your masks over and over again to try and find the one that's going to manipulate the outcome that you want. So you then say, in all the great novels of Dostoevsky, you'll find this principle coming back again and again. Figures who somehow change the landscape by refusing to close in on themselves, by refusing to defend themselves. Well, you'd really like that, wouldn't you, Rowan, if I didn't defend myself, that I just let a sadistic, psychopathic, pervert, a sexual predator like you just trample all over me and give you whatever you want and refuse to defend myself. Why don't you stop defending yourself? And why don't you admit all the things that you've done and all the lies that you've told? You never do anything but defend yourself. You're not doing a very good job at it because you're so ridiculous. Their stories, their novelistic unfolding, are stories about those whose reinvention is a kind of self-stripping or self-denying. You've got quite a weird look on your face when you say that as well. This is not long after the video you made where you told me I had to bring in all the webs and go out in the rain and get wet, and I'd got no option, I'd got no choice, it's raining, be wet. That's what you said. A kind of self-stripping or self-denying. Well, you dream on, boyo. In any case, I don't want to make my future lover jealous, do I? You know, he might get a bit jealous if I just start stripping. So I'll just keep my clothes on for now until you're in prison, because I don't want to be making my beloved, who is so wonderful, jealous by just stripping willy-nilly. So I won't bother doing that, thank you. They become selves by not being the kind of self you expect them to be. this is these fictional characters, these people who don't really exist, who are make-believe, isn't it? And you're probably making this up anyway. And behind this is the long tradition in Russia of these holy fools, these wild and eccentric figures who appear quite often in Russian chronicles, sometimes walking naked through the streets. So nudity seems to be featuring quite a lot, and making space. I bet that's a complete coincidence. Sometimes walking naked through the streets in midwinter, sometimes throwing stones at churches and praying in pubs. Well, I'm not going to be doing either of those things either. And I'm not going to be walking naked anywhere, so don't get excited. People who constantly run across the ordinary conventions of being holy, and by doing that somehow open up something that would otherwise not be there. Well, I'm trying to follow Christ, and I don't remember him telling anyone to start stripping off or walking naked through the street in midwinter, so I'll give that a miss. You're completely mad. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip, and then the one after that is the final clip.
One of the great 19th century saints of Russia, Seraphim of Sarov, said, "If you have peace in your heart, thousands of people find their healing around you." And Arseny in this book is that kind of person. He continues his wandering. He continues his holy folly. He goes on pilgrimage to Jerusalem with another holy fool. He comes back to Russia. He finally becomes a monk and takes the monastic name of Loris, Lavra in Russian, the title of the book. He goes on, you might say, reinventing himself. But he goes on reinventing himself in a way that consistently gives more and more space. Russian novels of the 19th and 20th century often have figures like this in them. Figures whose withdrawal so that others may find life or hope around them, who are, in the eyes of the world, failures, or who are, in the eyes of the world, impossibly eccentric. These figures turn out to be the ones who actually bring something new or different into a world where people are constantly trying to reinvent themselves so as to be safer with fewer open doors around them. In all the great novels of Dostoevsky, you'll find this principle coming back again and again. Figures who somehow change the landscape by refusing to close in on themselves, by refusing to defend themselves. Their stories, their novelistic unfolding, are stories about those whose reinvention is a kind of self-stripping or self-denying. They become selves by not being the kind of self you expect them to be. And behind this is the long tradition in Russia of these holy fools, these wild and eccentric figures who appear quite often in Russian chronicles, sometimes walking naked through the streets in midwinter, sometimes throwing stones at churches and praying in pubs, people who constantly run across the ordinary conventions of being holy, and by doing that, open up something that would otherwise not be there.
So you go on to say, as you read a really good novel, what is it you're tracing in the stories of the persons there? Well, they're not persons, are they? They're characters in a novel, and they're make-believe. Processes of reinvention that shrink and narrow and restrict who people are and what they can be, because those are the tragic stories. Stories where suffering, frustration, sheer difficulty, you do some melodramatic acting at this point in the video, sheer difficulty, the sheer difficulty of being human repeatedly drives people not inwards, but outwards. Look, Rowan, I'm not having anything to do with you or any disgusting perverts. I'm not stripping off and walking round the streets in midwinter or even in midsummer, for that matter. So stop deluding yourself. I'm not trying to be a holy fool. I'm not a fool anyway. There's nothing holy about being a fool in any case. So just don't bother thinking you're going to manipulate me with this shit, because I know what shit it is, and I know what you're trying to manipulate me into doing, which is saving your pathetic skin. So then you go on to talk about, this is what you say: narratives of how people become selves, become persons, not by spraying out the borders of their territory like some animal, putting its scent all around. So you're comparing me to an animal now because I've sprayed out the territory of my body and you're not having it, and your perverted colleague isn't having it. And no one's having it unless I decide they can. It's my body. And I wouldn't expect anyone else to feel any different about their body. I wouldn't go forcing myself on other people. So this just shows what a disgusting pervert you are. You've got no respect for other people and for their right to self-determine and to decide who they want to be involved with. You don't believe in freedom of association. You said that in a dialogue that you had with Tony Blair. I've already shown the clip of it, actually, when I was talking about something similar in the past. You were talking about interfaith relationships, and you said when you do an interfaith dialogue, the problem is you only get to talk to the people who want to talk to you. And how do you get to talk to the people who don't want to talk to you? Well, the answer to that is you don't. They've got every right not to talk to you. Anybody on this earth has got every right not to talk to you. And you are not forcing your satanic, filthy, psychopathic person on me. You can call me what you like. I don't give a shit. I know what a lying scumbag you are, and I'm not having anything to do with you. So you then go on to say, you're talking about this animal putting its scent all around. But people who understand that the reinvention that matters is a kind of letting go. Well, I've let go of everything, Rowan. I've let go of everything rather than have anything to do with satanic filth like you. And you then go on to talk about Shakespeare's dramas, and you say these dramas are sometimes outrageous. They're about sometimes outrageous moments where new possibilities emerge, where boundaries are crossed, where what you thought was over returns. The person you thought was dead is alive, and something opens up. Well, there's nobody returning into my life, particularly not anybody who's got anything to do with space, and particularly not Illuminati shills who are masquerading as archbishops and masquerading as Christians, whereas in fact they're just a subversive element and use references to God and Christ and so on like punctuation marks. So nothing's opening up, Rowan, so stop fantasising about it. You then talk about exercising creative power in telling stories about ourselves, and you say, do we exercise that power in creating the safe, the impressive version of ourselves, or do we, like Arsene, go on reinventing ourselves, not as the giants and heroes and saints that we'd like to be, but as those willing to give more and more space for the life of others to come alive in us or around us? Well, no, I'm not giving any space for you or any other disgusting pervert, and I don't make up stories about myself. Everything I've said about myself to anybody is true. You're the one who makes up stories and pretends you can speak 12 languages, or however many it was at the last count. And doesn't even say a word of Russian at the Russian embassy. So you're the one who makes up these stories about yourself and puts on silly accents and presents yourself in a way that's entirely unrealistic. You misrepresent yourself. You try and make out that you're more holy than other people. You're very dedicated to God. You spend an awful lot of time praying and devoting yourself to God. And you care so much about the poor, and you want to empower women and liberate gay people and all these things. But in fact, your actions are the exact opposite of all these things. You've impoverished me. Despite the fact that you've done everything you could to ruin my life, I still got a degree, a postgraduate degree. I did another degree in Spanish. You're trying to make out that I'm really chaotic, and I'd entered a middle class profession, and I'd been working for the same employer full time for 10 years in 2 different jobs. So you're not helping the poor. You've done everything you could to impoverish me and to ruin all my hopes for my life, which you started off in my 20s, which was bad enough what you did to me in the church, but you tried to extend that everywhere and to ruin everything and turn members of my family against me and all this kind of thing. So don't bother criticising anyone else for making up stories about themselves, because you've invented this persona, as I've said, who's concerned about the poor, wants to give women a voice, and wants to liberate gay people and and people in the third world and save the environment and all this kind of thing. And the reality is you're a psychopathic scumbag. You're a satanic filth and you're a sexual predator. So you are inventing stories about yourself. I've never invented any stories about myself. Anything I've said about myself is true. If other people find anything hard to believe that I've said about myself, they can check it out if they want. But the reality is, there's only 2 reasons why they would be suspicious of it. One is that they make up stories about themselves, and so they think everyone else is the same, which is like you. Or the other possibility is they've met someone like you before who constantly makes up stories about himself, and they think, well, she might be the same as him. So don't talk to me about making up stories. I'm not making up any stories. You've made up all the stories. And this is why you're so easy to catch out, because you can't even remember what you've said before. Like when you were talking about the story of Noah and believing the book of Genesis, when you'd previously said in another video that you didn't believe the book of Genesis and you thought that anyone who did was misreading it. And then also the example that I gave earlier, where you said that Teresa of Avila had a love affair as a teenager, when you'd written in a book earlier that she definitely didn't have a lover as a teenager, and you criticised someone else who said that she did. So you're the one who makes up the stories to suit whatever your personal and political agenda is in that moment. Anyway, I'm going to play this clip now, and I'm also going to play a clip from the lecture you gave about Dostoevsky the day after this lecture that I'm talking about now. And then I'll say a word about my beloved in a minute.
It's an interesting question to think about in relation not just to this novel, but to novels as a whole. As you read a really good novel, what is it you're tracing in the stories of the persons there? Processes of reinvention that shrink and narrow and restrict who people are and what they can be, because those are the tragic stories. Stories where suffering, frustration, sheer difficulty, the sheer difficulty of being human, repeatedly drives people not inwards, but outwards. They're not exactly comedies, though this is incidentally a very funny book, as well as a very serious one, like Dostoevsky's books. Not comedies, but not tragedies either. Narratives of how people become selves, become persons, not by spraying out the borders of their territory, like some animal putting its scent all around, but people who understand that the real reinvention, the reinvention that matters, is a kind of letting go. A good novel will raise questions like that for us. A good drama also. Think of Shakespeare's dramas in that light. Dramas of closing up, dramas of opening out, dramas that are all about the possibilities and the relationships being shut down one by one, dramas that are about unexpected, sometimes outrageous moments where new possibilities emerge, where boundaries are crossed, where what you thought was over returns, the person you thought was dead is alive, and something opens up. Drama and fiction are, it seems, pretty universal human activities. Universal, I've suggested, partly because we are fascinated by our own stories, much too fascinated most of the time. But if we engage with the narrative of drama and of fiction, part of what we might hope to draw from it, from that engagement, and to draw from the really brilliant, the really searching bits of drama and fiction, is that question of how we exercise most creatively our creative power of telling stories about ourselves. Do we exercise that power in creating the safe, the impressive, the successful version of ourselves? Or do we, like Arseny in this remarkable book, go on reinventing ourselves, not as the giants and heroes and saints we'd like to be, but as those willing to give more and more space for the life of others to come alive in us or around us?
He doesn't want us to move on from the impossible moment of tension and darkness and contradiction too quickly. He doesn't want to give us the narrative satisfaction of saying it turned out like this or like that, because the universe has not turned out like this or like that. The universe we actually inhabit is not a finished universe. If you're a believer, like Dostoevsky, you will believe that it turns out on the side of reconciliation. But nothing guarantees that from where we now are. Don't move on too quickly. Stay with the moment. Stay, if you like, with Pyotr in the kitchen, waiting for the shot.
Say you'll be by me when the evidence comes along. First and last and always, my calling, my time. First and last and always, my. You can stand all night at a red light anywhere in town, hailing Marys left and right, but none of them slow down. I've seen the best of men go past. I don't wanna be the last. Give me something fast.
So, just to conclude, obviously, I want to thank you once again for bringing me and my beloved together, because we're just made for each other. I mean, he's so wonderful. He's the most wonderful man I've ever met. I did mention that he's a gog, didn't I? And that he's got gigantic feet, and his Welsh accent is very sexy. So I'm glad I mentioned all of that. Oh, and I also want to mention that I'm preparing my CV now to apply for your job in Cambridge as soon as you're in prison. So I'm getting my CV together for that. And I thought, when I have my photo taken with my beloved once you're in prison, to send to you to cheer you up while you're in there, because you'll be so glad you've brought us together. I thought we could have our photo taken outside your college in Cambridge, and to cheer you up even more, we could both be waving a couple of union flags to remind you of the Brexit vote. So that's what I'm going to do. But get back to me about that picture frame, won't you? What you want me to do about the picture frame. And if you get your own frame, let me know what size it is and I'll have the picture made the right size. So that's all I'm going to say about my beloved now, other than I've seen him this week and he's just so wonderful. And I'm really looking forward to seeing him over the weekend again, because he's just fantastic and I can't stop thinking about him. And we just gaze adoringly at each other every now and again. But obviously, I'm saving myself until you're in prison, so don't worry about that. So I'll leave it there for now. But don't worry, you've talked plenty more shit for me to be getting on with. So even if you never say another word of shit in your life, which is highly unlikely given your track record, then there's still plenty to be getting on with. Oh, and don't forget, be alert, because I know you're going to be in Manchester on Sunday. Sorry I missed you in York this morning, but I didn't want to get on people's degree ceremonies, you see, coming to arrest you. Although maybe they would have quite liked that, you never know. Brighten up the morning a bit. So, be alert in Manchester on Sunday, which is only a stone's throw from here, and I did used to live in Greater Manchester, so I know my way around quite well, and I shall be turning up to arrest you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Hasta la próxima.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting